Okay, this is Donnie, and I was going to talk about scientific culture and the kind of values we want to develop as a team. Um, so I have some different resources in a folder. So a couple are articles about very productive writers, and I think there's some things we can glean from that. And then I've got a couple of things that either Josh or I wrote up as we were finishing graduate school, kind of looking back on, um, things we wanted to remember as we were thinking about becoming research mentors ourselves. Um, so I'll go over those. So this first one was an essay that I wrote for a Division 17 award, and I talked about reflecting on lessons across several different areas. Um, so you're welcome to read through that, and if you have any questions about kind of counseling, teaching, or service, some of those areas, I'd be happy to talk more about that. I'm going to focus on some of the lessons I learned related to research. Um, so the first is vision is important. Um, Josh and so Josh was a year ahead of me, and we really kind of formed a strong team. And later on, there's another guy, Daryl Van Tongeren, who kind of started writing with us. So we've done a lot of work together and have developed a pretty tight knit team. And one of the key moments of us kind of developing that team was at the beginning of my third year. Um, I set a really specific goal with Josh of how many articles we were going to try to submit within the next year. And so, I mean, it was ambitious. We were both anxious about getting jobs. And so, we were kind of controlling the controllables, if you will. And so each of us, had our thesis data, and we hadn't submitted our stuff yet. So we had a lit review and several empirical studies. So we set a goal to each submit 10 papers, and we had a few that were kind of already in the works. And then we asked our mentor to take the lead on 5 other papers. So we were going to try to submit 25 papers. So this to us was just like an outrageous goal. But it was fun because, I mean, all actually Josh, Ev, and I are all a little bit competitive, and it just kind of mobilized our group and gave us something kind of ridiculous to shoot for. And it just kind of consolidated our sense of kind of being part of a team. So, I've read a little bit about teams and leadership, and it does seem like having a clear and challenging goal is one of the ingredients that kind of helps facilitate cohesion in teams. So, that was important. Excellence is a habit. Um, so I relate this to training as an athlete. So, somewhere around eighth grade, the high school coach started picking me and a couple other guys in our neighborhood up every morning at 6 o'clock. And we continued that habit for 5 years of high school. And then, I played in college. And so, really, there was about a 10-year period where 4 or 5 days a week, I was doing something to kind of train my mind and body related to either football or soccer. Um, and I think there's a similar process for trying to develop expertise in any area. So if you want to be a strong writer or a strong therapist, you kind of have to just consistently put energy and hard work into developing that expertise. And part of that is you're not going to put in that kind of time unless you can get some sort of rhythm and routine that you enjoy, and you kind of tap into the intrinsic motivation of it. Um, so I'm kind of thinking of Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers and the 10,000 hour rule. And, he talks about one issue is time, but I think one thing he doesn't talk about is nobody puts in 10,000 hours for something that they just find dreadful. So a key part of developing yourself as a writer and researcher is finding the parts of it that are intrinsically motivating to you and kind of learning to tie potentially mundane parts into that, some of those larger motivational structures. Um, Third, invest in building methodological skills. This is pretty straightforward, but early career, this is really one of your rate limiting steps. You will bring value to even really strong teams if you can invest a lot of time and energy into kind of becoming as strong as you possibly can in terms of quantitative skills. World-class science happens in teams. I didn't know that. Ev, my mentor, told me that in one of our early meetings, and all of a sudden, a career in research seemed more interesting to me. I thought it was more like A Beautiful Mind, where this person who ended up having schizophrenia was kind of isolating and trying to figure out a huge, giant idea that would change the world, but was a pretty lonely process. And it turns out the way most psychological research happens is, to me, actually really fun. You're just meeting with people who are interested in similar things and pretty curious and inquisitive and enjoy writing. And a lot of the ideas get developed through relationships and kind of just talking about different things. And typically you're writing about areas that you're really passionate about socially, things in the world that bother you, or conflicts that you have, or things you want to understand better. So yeah, plan strategically. So our mantra, to kind of remember this, is never do anything for a single purpose. So examples are, if you're doing a paper for a class and your research area is, mine was forgiveness and humility, then don't waste any opportunity to kind of expand your expertise. And even better yet, if you can line up different things that you have to do with kind of the coin of the realm, which is publications. If you can line up, for example, a presentation at APA with a submission that you're trying to get out, then the same energy goes towards multiple things. Same principle goes for like applying for grants. If you can apply for one grant, but use that same idea to potentially target several other potential funders, then if it doesn't get funded at one, that's okay. Maybe it'll get funded at the next one. And then finally, entrepreneurs make good researchers. I was taking a career class and I got my RIASEC feedback, and I was a little concerned because, um, social was my highest, and I kind of expected that. That was kind of common for psychologists. But then I was thinking about becoming a researcher, but investigative was probably like fourth on my list, and it was, kind of a medium interest. Higher than that was artistic, and I think entrepreneurial. I think those two were pretty similar as a second and third. So I went to Ev, and I'm like, oh no, maybe this isn't the right career for me. How's this going to fit in? And he kind of laughed at me and he said that I would probably find some sort of outlet for the entrepreneurial interest. And yeah, it turns out, I actually think for any type of interest within research, especially given that research happens in teams, teams need a variety of personality styles and abilities, kind of different interest in order to kind of develop strong theory and kind of get different perspectives on the ideas. You really don't want a super homogenous group in terms of personality or interest. So yeah, that was kind of the final point. So I'm going to skip over these sections. So Josh and I wrote one article on kind of what we thought our mentor did well to help us kind of get oriented as researchers and writers. So one was he just kind of oriented us to the scientific culture, which is kind of what I'm trying to do here. He kind of taught us mighty is the pen. Basically, if in banking, the primary value has to do with how much money you have. Within academia, publications and tied to that are kind of grants at times, but publications are the primary coin of the realm. And so as you're kind of thinking about how to spend your energy and time in graduate school, that's one of the stronger places to invest. So a gaudy example of this is I was talking with Frank Fincham, and he was telling me a story about how he was trying to kind of shift the culture at Florida State, and he had a group of graduate students, and it was a group of people training to be clinicians as well, and he kind of asked them, okay, who are you? And it was one of these, people took it as kind of a navel gazing question. And, some people would say, well, I am, my relationships or my family or different things they valued. And at one point he kind of stopped him. He said, no, say this after me. I am my vida. And they were kind of tentative. I am my vida. He goes, no, louder. I am my vida. So as a group, they're like, I am my vida. No, louder. I am my, repeat. I am my vida. I am my vida. And they kind of worked up to a fever pitch where people kind of walking by in the hall were kind of looking in and trying to figure out what was going on. But it's kind of a silly story, and it's possible to take things to an extreme. But in terms of how you're evaluated when people don't know you at all, there is some truth to this. So basically, people can kind of look quickly over your vita and get a sense for the work that you've been doing in the field. They can look at the strength of some of your publications and get a sense of what relationships you've developed and where you've spent time and what level of kind of rigor you're publishing at. One thing that Ev did was kind of acculturated us to a norm of something for you, something for me. So it's kind of striking a balance between us working close to his area of expertise, but also exploring our own interest. Another way that he said this was, you can study anything you want and forgiveness. Forgiveness was his main area at the time. So I kind of already mentioned never do anything for a single purpose. The manual, so I actually have this in some of our supplies, but he structured some of the learning, especially early on, where as I was kind of anxious and feeling insecure about the process, I just kind of poured that into reading different things and trying to wrap my head around the different writing projects. And on an early paper, he gave me a lot of feedback and said I had made a lot of mistakes in terms of APA style, and he gave me pretty direct guidance to kind of memorize the APA manual, because that was going to waste a ton of everybody's time if I didn't kind of figure that out quickly. And I actually kind of read a number of books just on writing and how to kind of craft arguments and stuff like that. So if you're interested in any of those resources, let me know. And then one thing we develop is kind of the idea of putting in a lot of energy early. So one of my favorite stories about Josh is, when I was on my recruiting visit, he had just gotten feedback on his master's thesis, and it was just covered in ink. And there was one part where Ev had given him feedback. He basically said, "This is not science underlined. Any undergraduate can summarize studies." So apparently Josh had kind of organized his lit review by, Davis et al. Did this, Hook et al. Did this, and he didn't really have kind of an analytical integration of that information and kind of a more critical view of it. So he got really strong feedback of kind of the step up in terms of the norms for a doctoral level literature review. But later on, Ev kind of told me that he purposefully gives a lot of feedback, especially on the first manuscript he receives, because this ends up saving a lot of time for everybody later on, if you learn how to do things right the first time. And then meet regularly with students. So at one point I remember him saying sometimes people are tempted to save time on meetings, but there's really no shortcut for providing consistent accountability and support. And then building a collaborative and supportive team. That's what we're trying to do, but a lot of times the kind of values, the motivation, having high standards, working hard, those kind of things can develop a synergy when you have several people committed to those kind of values versus just trying to do it by yourself. And yeah, we've already kind of talked about science happening in teams. And then, yeah, so the last thing I'll kind of talk about in this video is just above all, kind of as a mentor, being for your students. So there were a few times where I saw even kind of behind the scenes go to bat for his students, kind of run interference. So I was the program assistant and I was in faculty meetings, and yeah, there were just a lot of subtle ways that I saw him kind of advocating on behalf of his students. And I would say 80% of the time his students didn't really even know what he was doing. There were several times even where I ended up kind of hearing secondhand how he had kind of protected me or just kind of looked out for me in terms of I did a lot of work to develop ideas on humility, and at one point we got a grant together, and he was really careful just to kind of share credit for that, even though clearly his expertise and experience were a big part of my success. He was really careful just to kind of share that, and when other people would kind of attribute credit to him, he would share credit and kind of be purposeful and kind of affirming the work that I had done, and same thing with Josh. So I think there are a lot of intangibles that go into being a strong mentor, and those are things that can Carlene and I are kind of continually striving to become strong leaders and mentors.